The city was alive with noise, but for the alien girl it was nothing more than empty echoes. She stood in the corner of the market street, her body trembling from hunger, her eyes dull yet searching. People passed her by without a second look. Merchants shouted their prices, buyers argued over goods, children ran past laughing. She was invisible to them all, just another shadow lost in the chaos. Her stomach burned with pain, her thin hands clutched at the fabric of her worn dress. She had not eaten for days, and the strength in her body was fading. Her mind screamed for food, for warmth, for anything that could keep her alive a little longer. But she had nothing left to give. In her world, dignity had already been stolen. She had been abandoned when she could not pay her debts, mocked when she asked for help, beaten when she begged for mercy. Now she had only one thing left, herself. And so she whispered offers to strangers, her voice barely louder than the wind. "Food, please. I will do anything," she said, her lips dry, her words breaking. Most people turned away with disgust. Others laughed and muttered insults. No one gave her food, no one gave her hope. She was nothing to them, just another broken soul on the desperate streets. The night grew colder as the day ended and lanterns lit the corners of the market. The alien girl sank to her knees, her eyes on the dirt, her heart heavy with shame. She wondered if this was how her life would end, alone, starved, forgotten. Tears filled her eyes, but she forced them back. No one cared for tears. No one cared for her pain. Then, footsteps slowed. A shadow fell across her small frame. She looked up and saw a man, human, tall, with tired eyes but a calm face. He did not look away, and for the first time in days, someone met her gaze. Her breath caught in her chest. She expected him to laugh, or to sneer, or perhaps to take advantage of her weakness. That was what men did. That was what she had learned. But instead, he crouched down to her level, his eyes soft but unreadable. "You look hungry," he said quietly. The girl's throat tightened. She nodded, unable to form words. Her body shook not only from hunger but from fear. Was this another cruel trick? Would he use her desperation like others had? Without another word, the man reached into his bag and pulled out bread, still warm, and a small container of stew. He placed them in her hands gently as if they were treasures. She stared at the food, her mind refusing to believe it was real. "Eat," he said simply. Her hands shook as she lifted the bread. She took a bite, the taste exploding in her mouth. Warmth spread through her body, and tears fell freely this time. She could not stop herself. She ate quickly, desperately, while the man remained silent, watching, making sure she had enough. The market noise faded. The lights blurred through her tears. For the first time in a long time, she felt something strange, safety. She wanted to ask him why he had given her food without asking for anything, why he had looked at her with kindness when others saw only dirt. But her voice failed. She finished eating, and only then did she dare to glance at him again. He stood, and for a moment, she thought he would leave. Her chest tightened with panic. She wanted to call out, to beg him not to go, but fear held her back. Instead, he extended his hand, not to demand, not to pull, but to offer. "Come," he said softly. "You should not be out here alone." Her heart raced. She did not know him. He was human, a stranger in a world that had shown her nothing but cruelty. Yet in his voice there was no threat, only a quiet promise. She hesitated, her mind torn between fear and hope. The desperate streets had taken everything from her, but maybe this moment could give her something back. Her hand, trembling, slowly reached out. As her small fingers touched his, she felt warmth spread into her chest. It was not just the warmth of food, it was something deeper, something she had thought she would never feel again. And in that silent, fragile moment, a bond began. The desperate streets had been her prison, her grave. But tonight, because of one human's choice, they might also become the place where her story of hope truly began. The night air was sharp as the human led the girl away from the crowded market. She walked slowly behind him, her steps unsteady, her heart unsure. Every part of her wanted to trust the food in her stomach, yet her mind warned her that kindness often came with a hidden cost. She kept her eyes lowered, waiting for the moment when his true demand would be revealed. But the human said nothing. He walked in silence, guiding her through winding streets until the noise of merchants and drunk men faded behind them. The air grew quieter, the lanterns fewer, and the shadows stretched across the walls. Fear touched her again. But when she looked up at him, his pace was steady and his hands relaxed. He did not grip her arm or force her to follow. He only glanced back once, checking that she had not fallen behind. At last, they reached a small home built of stone and wood. Smoke drifted from its chimney and the faint smell of warmth and fire reached her. She froze at the door, her mind racing with doubt. She had entered places before where men promised safety but offered pain instead. Her thin frame trembled as her instincts screamed for escape. The human noticed her fear. He did not force her. Inside. He opened the door, stepped back and motioned with a calm hand. If you want, you may come in. If not, you can leave. The choice is yours. Those words struck her like lightning. No one had ever given her a choice before. Choice had been stolen from her life long ago. She hesitated, her breath catching, then with slow steps, she crossed the doorway. Inside, the room glowed with firelight. A table stood in the center, a shelf lined with simple tools and books rested by the wall, and a bed covered in blankets filled one corner. It was no palace, but to her it looked like something greater than treasure. It was warmth. It was safety. The human closed the door gently, careful not to startle her. He placed more food on the table, fruit, bread, and a small pitcher of water. She stared at it with wide eyes, unsure if she was dreaming. He sat across from her and spoke in a voice low and steady. You should eat slowly now. Too much at once may hurt you. Take your time. She obeyed, breaking the bread into small pieces, sipping the water carefully. Each bite eased her pain, and tears rose again though she tried to hide them. He noticed, but he did not shame her. He only asked, "What is your name?" Her lips parted, but no sound came. Her name was a secret she had not spoken in months, maybe years. Speaking it felt dangerous, like giving away a piece of herself. She shook her head quickly. "That is all right," he said, not pressing her. "You can tell me when you are ready." The girl studied him from across the table. His face carried lines of hardship. His hands were rough from work, yet his eyes carried no cruelty. He watched her not like a man waiting for payment, but like someone who wanted nothing more than to see her safe. It made no sense. Why would a human do this for her? Finally, he stood and placed a folded blanket on the bed. "You can rest there. It is yours for tonight." Her body stiffened again. Rest, safety, a bed. It was more than she dared hope. Suspicion rose. Fear twisted her stomach. She whispered, her voice weak but firm. "What do you want from me?" The human turned, surprised at the question. For a moment, silence filled the room. Then he answered, calm and clear. "Nothing. I want you to live, not die in the street. That is all." She stared, unable to believe. His words carried no hidden weight, no threat. They were simple, honest. She clutched the blanket and lowered her eyes, tears blurring her vision. Something inside her heart cracked open, a space where hope had once lived. The fire crackled, filling the silence. She lay on the bed, the blanket wrapped around her fragile body. The human turned away, giving her privacy, sitting by the fire as if he had done nothing remarkable. But to her, this was the most remarkable thing anyone had ever done. For the first time in a long time, she slept without fear of waking to pain. The warmth of the room, the food in her stomach, and the strange kindness of a human carried her into dreams. And as the flames burned low, the human sat awake, watching over her. He had seen many broken souls on those streets, but something in this girl's eyes had stopped him. He had made his choice, not to walk away like the rest, but To stay. And in that choice, the first seeds of something greater than either of them could imagine had been planted. The morning came softly, sunlight slipping through the cracks of the wooden shutters. The alien girl opened her eyes slowly, unsure if she was still alive or trapped in another cruel dream. She felt the weight of the blanket over her, the warmth of the fire that still glowed in the hearth, and the smell of food drifting through the room. For a moment she lay still, afraid that any movement would break the fragile peace she had found. Across the room, the human was already awake. He moved quietly, preparing food on the table, careful not to disturb her rest. His movements were simple, practiced, the hands of a man used to work rather than wealth. He turned and saw her awake, his expression calm but not distant. "You should eat," he said gently, pointing to the food waiting for her. She pushed herself up slowly, her body weak but her eyes wide. On the table sat a bowl of warm stew, pieces of bread, and a jug of clean water. The sight filled her with longing, yet fear still clung to her heart. Nothing in her life had ever been free. She tightened her hands around the blanket as if it could shield her from the truth. He noticed the hesitation. He did not speak again, only moved back to his chair by the fire, giving her space, waiting. The silence in the room was not heavy, it was patient. Finally, her hunger won the battle within her. She slipped from the bed and sat at the table. Her hands trembled as she reached for the bread, tearing off a small piece, tasting it slowly. Warmth spread through her body as she swallowed, and her chest shook with quiet sobs. The human did not look away. He watched her carefully, not as a man demanding payment, but as someone making sure she was safe. When her tears fell onto the table, he spoke, his voice calm. "Food should not bring shame. It is life. Eat without fear." She covered her face for a moment, overwhelmed. Her life until now had taught her that kindness was always a mask, that mercy was always a trap. Yet here was a human who had asked for nothing, who had given food, warmth, and a bed without demand. The thought felt dangerous, like hope returning to a heart that had forgotten how to feel. She took another bite, then another, until the bowl was empty. Her body eased, the sharp hunger finally fading. She sat back, breathing deeply, her eyes red from crying. "Better?" he asked. She nodded, slowly. "Yes," she whispered, her voice fragile. He gave a faint smile, the kind that carried no pride, only relief. "Good. You need strength." The girl studied him across the table. His clothes were plain, worn from labor, his hair untidy, his face marked by the sun. He was not rich, not powerful, not someone who could gain from feeding a starving stranger. That made his actions even harder to understand. "Why?" she asked suddenly, her voice breaking the quiet. The human tilted his head. "Why what? Why, me?" she asked, her hands clenched in her lap. "You could walk away like the others. You could laugh. You could use me. But you gave food. Why?" For a moment he did not answer. The fire crackled, filling the silence. Then he said, "Because you were dying, and no one should die with empty hands when another has enough to share. That is reason enough." His words struck her deeply. They were simple, but they carried a truth she could not deny. She lowered her gaze, her heart unsteady. The human stood and placed a jug of water beside her. "Rest more if you need. You are safe here. I will return after work." Her eyes lifted quickly. "You will leave?" He nodded. "Only for the day. There is labor to do. I will return before night." Fear touched her again. Alone in a stranger's house, surrounded by a world that hated her kind, could she remain? She wanted to flee. Yet the thought of stepping back into the desperate streets made her shiver. He noticed her fear and spoke again. "If you wish to leave, the door is open. If you wish to stay, no one will harm you here. The choice is yours." There, it was again, that word, choice. It shook her more than threats ever had. Slowly she nodded. "I will stay. He gave a simple nod in return, no smile of victory, no sign of satisfaction, only respect. Then he gathered his tools, slung a worn bag over his shoulder, and stepped out the door. The girl sat alone in the small home, the fire crackling softly, the taste of real food still on her tongue. She pressed her hands against her chest, feeling a warmth that was more than just the fire. It was the memory of kindness, of being treated not as an object but as someone worth saving. For the first time in her memory, she whispered her own name to the empty room, testing it on her lips as if she was learning to live again. And in that moment she knew. The first meal together had changed everything. The girl remained in the small house as the hours of the day passed. At first she sat in silence, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes darting toward the door every time the wind moved it. Each sound outside made her jump, as if the cruel voices from the market might come to drag her back. Yet none came. The fire burned warmly, the walls stood firm, and for the first time in many months she was not out in the cold. When the human returned that evening, carrying tools stained from work, she was still sitting near the table. He set down his bag, washed his hands in the small basin, and gave her a brief nod. There was no judgment in his eyes, no demand for an explanation of why she had not moved all day. He simply began preparing food again, as if her presence was already a natural part of his life. He placed another meal before her, vegetables cooked in broth, bread, and water. She hesitated, then ate quietly, stealing glances at him. He sat across from her, not staring but also not ignoring her, treating her presence as something ordinary. Slowly she felt the weight in her chest loosen. The second night was easier than the first. She lay under the blanket, listening to the sound of his breathing as he rested near the fire. Sleep came quicker, her body less tense, her mind less afraid. Days turned into a rhythm. Each morning he left for work and returned in the evening with food. Each night she ate, rested, and grew a little stronger. He never asked her to leave, never tried to control her, never demanded a price. At first she thought it must be a trick that one night he would reveal his true intent. Yet each day passed without cruelty, and doubt began to weaken. One evening, when he returned, she finally spoke more than a single word. Her voice was soft, uncertain. "My name is Leora." Human paused, his hand stilling on the loaf of bread he had been cutting. He looked at her with quiet respect. "Leora," he repeated, as if making a promise to remember. Then he nodded once. "I am Elias." Hearing his name was like opening a locked door. She had been nameless for so long, a shadow without identity. Yet now she had given a piece of herself to him, and he had given something in return. From then on, small conversations began to grow. At first, only a few words. Questions about whether she wanted more food, answers about whether she had rested. But slowly, Leora told fragments of her story. She spoke of the debt collectors who had taken her family's home, of the men who had mocked her weakness, of the hunger that had driven her to the desperate streets. Her voice shook as she spoke, and many times she stopped, unable to continue. But Elias never pushed. He listened in silence, his gaze steady, offering her the dignity of being heard. In return, he told her small parts of his own life. He was not rich, only a laborer who worked with wood and stone. He lived alone, his family gone, his house humble but safe. He did not claim to be a hero, only a man trying to live honestly. His words were plain, but to Leora, they carried more strength than any soldier's oath. Trust grew in small moments. When she reached for bread and he let her take the larger piece without comment. When she dropped a cup in fear and he only picked it up without anger. When she woke crying in the night and he gave her space until she calmed. Each time she expected cruelty, and each time he gave kindness instead. Still, shadows lingered in her heart. One evening, as they sat by the fire, she asked the question that haunted her most. "Why do you keep me here? Why not send me away?" Elias leaned back, the firelight painting his face in gold and shadow. "Because you deserve better than the streets. You deserve life, safety, and time to heal. No one should be left to die when they can be saved. His words were simple, yet they carved deep into her soul. No one had ever said she deserved anything, let alone safety or healing. Tears slipped down her cheeks and she turned her face away, ashamed of her weakness. Elias said nothing more. He let her cry without judgment, without demand, giving her the space to feel. That night, as she lay beneath the blanket, Leora realized that the fear which had gripped her since the day she was abandoned was slowly loosening its hold. The walls of Elias's home had become more than shelter. They had become the fragile beginnings of trust. It was still delicate, easily broken, but it was there. For the first time, she felt a flicker of something she had once thought gone forever. Hope. And, though she did not yet know it, the trust that was slowly growing between them would soon be tested by dangers waiting beyond those quiet walls. The days of peace could not last forever. Leora felt it long before it happened. Each night as she lay beneath the blanket, she dreamed of voices from the past, harsh and cruel, calling her worthless, dragging her back to the streets. She told herself it was only fear, yet in her heart she knew shadows always return when light begins to shine. One evening Elias came home later than usual. His shoulders were tense, his jaw set, and his eyes darker than before. He set his tools down quietly, but Leora noticed the change at once. "What happened?" she asked softly. He looked at her, then away, as if weighing his words. Finally he answered, "There are men in the town asking questions. They described you. I think they are the ones who once used your suffering for their gain." Leora's blood ran cold. She gripped the edge of the table, her body trembling. The memories rushed back, faces twisted with greed, hands that hurt, voices that laughed as she begged. She had escaped them by chance, and now they had returned. "They will come," she whispered, her voice breaking. "They always come back." Elias stepped closer, his presence firm and steady. "If they come, they will not take you. Not while I stand." His words should have eased her fear, yet doubt gnawed at her heart. He was only one man, and they were many. What if his kindness was not enough to stop them? What if she brought ruin upon the only person who had shown her mercy? The following night the danger revealed itself. Heavy fists pounded against the wooden door, shaking it on its hinges. Voices shouted from outside, demanding entry. "Open up, human," one of them roared. "You hide what belongs to us." Leora's breath caught in her throat. She stumbled, back, her eyes wide, her body frozen like prey before the strike. Her heart screamed at her to run, but her legs refused to move. Elias rose from his chair, his face hard with resolve. He motioned for her to stay behind him, then stepped to the door. "She does not belong to you," he called out, his voice strong. Laughter answered, cruel and sharp. "She owes us, human. She is our property. Step aside, and we will not hurt you." Elias gripped the wooden frame, his shoulders broad and unyielding. "No one is property. Leave or face me." There was silence for a moment. Then a heavy blow struck the door. The wood cracked, and Leora gasped in terror. Elias turned. To her, his voice calm but urgent. "Stay back, do not fear, I will not let them through." The men outside shouted again, threatening to burn the house, to drag her screaming into the night. Leora's knees buckled, her breath coming in short bursts. Every instinct told her this was the end, that kindness could not protect her from the cruelty of the world. But Elias stood like a wall before her. He took a wooden staff from beside the hearth, gripping it firmly. His eyes blazed not with fear, but with fire. "You will not touch her," he said through the door. Another crash shook the house. The door splintered, pieces of wood falling to the floor. Leora cried out, her body shaking. Yet Elias did not step aside. He raised the staff, ready for the fight. In that moment, she saw something she had never seen before. Not just kindness, but strength. Not just mercy, but the courage to risk everything for someone else. Her heart pounded with fear, yet also with something new. Faith. The pounding on the door stopped suddenly. Silence fell, heavy and tense. Then the voice outside spoke again, lower, filled with menace. "This is not over, human. She will be ours again. No one protects what belongs to us." The footsteps faded into the night, leaving only the sound of Leora's shaking breath. She collapsed to the floor, tears streaming down her face. Elias dropped the staff, hurried to her side, and lifted her gently. "They are gone," he said softly. "For now." Her hands clutched his shirt, her body trembling against him. "You should not protect me," she cried. "They will hurt you, they will kill you. I am not worth this." Elias held her firmly, his voice steady. "You are worth more than they will ever understand. No one decides your worth but you, and I will never let them take you." His words cut through her despair like light breaking through storm clouds. She pressed her face against his chest, sobbing until the weight of fear began to ease. That night, as she lay once more under the blanket, she did not sleep. She watched the fire glow against the walls and thought of the human who had stood unshaken against the darkness. She had been saved once by his food, but tonight he had saved her again with his courage. For the first time she dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could keep his promise. And in the shadows beyond the house, unseen eyes still watched. Planning, waiting. The danger had not ended. It had only begun. The night after the men threatened the house was long and heavy. Leora could not close her eyes without hearing their voices, without seeing the door shatter in her mind. She lay awake, curled beneath the blanket, her heart pounding at every creak of wood. Yet through the fear, there was one anchor: Elias. He sat by the fire, staff in hand, awake long after she should have been asleep. His presence was like a shield, steady and silent. When morning came, Leora expected him to be tired or angry, yet his eyes held only calm determination. He placed bread and fruit on the table as if nothing had changed, but everything had changed. Something inside her had shifted when he had stood between her and danger. As the days passed, Leora began to see Elias not only as her protector, but as something more. He spoke little, yet every action carried weight. When he worked outside, he left water where she could reach it. When she startled at sudden noises, he slowed his movement so she would not fear. When she cried quietly at night, he did not shame her. He simply added more wood to the fire to keep her warm. Trust grew stronger, but along with trust came feelings she did not understand. When he smiled faintly after she managed to laugh at one of his dry remarks, her chest filled with warmth. When his hand brushed hers as he passed her bread, her heart raced. She told herself it was foolish, yet the truth could not be ignored. Her soul had begun to lean toward him. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Elias returned with a small bundle of wildflowers. Their petals were bright, fragile, yet full of life. He placed them in a cup of water on the table without explanation. Leora stared at them, her eyes wide. "For me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded simply. "For the house. For you. Something beautiful should be here." Tears filled her eyes. No one had ever given her something without demand, without price. She touched the flowers gently, as if they might vanish. That night she slept with the cup near her bed, their scent reminding her that beauty could exist even after despair. As weeks passed, the bond between them deepened. Elias never treated her as weak, yet he understood her scars. He encouraged her to step outside into the sunlight again, to walk the path near the house, to breathe freely without fear. At first she clung to him, her steps trembling, but with time she lifted her head higher, her steps growing steadier. One evening when they sat by the fire, Leora spoke of her dreams. "I used to imagine a life where I was not hunted, where I could choose who I was. I thought it was impossible." Elias looked at her, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. "Dreams are not impossible. Sometimes they only need time, and someone to believe in them." She lowered her gaze, her cheeks warm. His words felt like more than comfort, they felt like a promise. The danger in the shadows had not vanished. She knew the men could return, yet her heart no longer beat only with fear. Now, it beat with something new, something she had not dared to feel in all her years of suffering. She wanted to stay with him, not only because he protected her, but because his presence had become her safe place. One night, unable to hide her feelings any longer, she spoke quietly, while he added wood to the fire. "Why do you care so much for me, Elias? You could have turned away like the rest. You could have let me die in the street." He paused, his hand resting on the log, then set it down carefully. He turned to her, his expression steady. "Because I saw someone worth saving, not a beggar, not a burden, but a soul with strength. I could not walk away." Her heart ached at his words. She pressed her hand to her chest, tears threatening her eyes again. "I have nothing to give you." He stepped closer, kneeling so he was at her level. "You have more than you know. You give me purpose, you give me reason, and that is enough." The fire crackled between them, filling the silence with warmth. Leora's breath caught as she looked into his eyes. There was no greed, no hunger for power, only truth. Her fear melted into something deeper. Love. She reached for his hand, her touch trembling yet sure. His hand closed around hers, firm and gentle, sealing a bond unspoken yet undeniable. That night Leora lay awake not from fear, but from wonder. She had been nothing but a shadow on the desperate streets, yet here she was, held in the light of someone who saw her worth. From protection had grown trust, and from trust had blossomed love. And though the world beyond their walls remained filled with danger, within this small home, two hearts had begun to beat as one. The days after Elias and Leora admitted their feelings carried a new light. Their bond grew stronger with each sunrise, yet the shadow of danger remained close. The men who had once claimed Leora as property had not been defeated, only driven back. She knew they would try again, and Elias knew it too. One cold evening, the threat returned. The pounding on the door was louder than before, the voices harsher. "Give her to us, human," one shouted. "She belongs to us. Step aside or we will burn your house to the ground." Leora froze, fear gripping her heart. But Elias rose, staff in hand, his face a wall of determination. He opened the door just enough to face them, his body blocking the entrance completely. "She belongs to no one," he said firmly. "Not to you, not to me, not to anyone. She is free." The men laughed, cruel and mocking, then surged forward. Elias struck with his staff, the wood cracking against the first attacker's arm. Another lunged, but Elias pushed him back with the strength of a man who fought not for pride but for love. The fight was brutal, the sounds of struggle filling the night. Leora trembled, torn between terror and awe, as she saw Elias stand against 3 men alone. At last, with bruises on his arms and cuts on his face, Elias drove them back. One cursed him, another spat on the ground, but all retreated into the darkness. Their threat lingered in the air, yet they were gone. For now. Leora rushed to him, tears blurring her sight. She touched his wounds with trembling hands. "You should not have risked this for me," she whispered. "You could have died." Elias placed his hand over hers, steady and sure. "You are worth every risk. I would face them again and again, if it meant keeping you safe." Her heart broke, open completely in that moment. She realized there was no force in the world stronger than the love he carried for her. A love born not from desire, but from compassion, loyalty, and truth. That night, she did not sleep alone by the fire. She sat beside him, her hand in his, listening to the steady beat of his heart, a rhythm that promised she would never again be abandoned. In the days that followed, Leora found her courage growing. She no longer walked with her head lowered, no longer saw herself as a shadow. She began to help Elias with his work, learning to cook simple meals, sweeping the small home, even daring to laugh when he teased her gently. Each small act of daily life became a thread weaving their souls together, Then came the day when Elias, standing before her as the sun set behind him, spoke the words that changed everything. "Leora," he said, his voice steady but filled with quiet fire. "I do not want you to be afraid anymore. I do not want you to feel alone. Stay with me, not only as someone I protect, but as my wife. Share my life, share my home, share my heart." Her breath caught, her eyes wide with shock. Tears welled as she whispered, "You would have me, after all that I am, after all that I was?" He stepped closer, his hand lifting her chin gently. "I would have you because of who you are now. Because I see your strength, your courage, your heart. You are not broken, Leora, you are whole. And I love you." The words she had never dreamed of hearing wrapped around her like a second heartbeat. She pressed her hand to his chest, feeling the steady rhythm beneath his skin, and whispered back, "Yes, I will stay. I will be yours." Their bond was sealed not with wealth or ceremony, but with truth spoken in the light of the setting sun. Two souls, once broken by the cruelty of the world, stood whole together. That night, for the first time in her life, Leora felt not only safe, but chosen. She was no longer the starving girl on the desperate streets, no longer the frightened shadow hunted by cruel men. She was Elias's wife, his equal, his partner in every breath. And though danger still lurked beyond the horizon, though shadows might rise again, she knew she would never face them alone. Together they were stronger than fear, stronger than hunger, stronger than the chains of the past. The world had tried to break her, but love had rebuilt her, and in the warmth of Elias's arms, Leora finally found what she had been searching for all along. Not just survival, but a future. The desperate streets had been the place of her fall, but now they were also the place of her rebirth. Her story, once written in hunger and despair, was rewritten in love.